All right, back in the foyer of the House live as our coverage continues here on CPAC to Budget 2018. And with me now is the Finance Minister, Bill Morneau. Good to see you again.
I'm really happy to be here, Peter.
Thanks for coming by to see me. Let's talk about one of the things that's not in the budget that people are talking about today, and that's no measures at this point to offset any potential effects from corporate tax cuts in the United States or the possible collapse of NAFTA talks. You say that you need more time to study this and look at this. So I guess my question is, do you think there's not going to be a need for any additional economic support from the government to deal with any problems down the road, or you just need more time to see what kind of support you'll have to provide?
Well, what we've said, Peter, is we absolutely believe that we need to keep the Canadian economy competitive. So that is the frame that we come at all these things with. But what we respond to people is by saying, let's take a look at where we're at. I mean, clearly the investments that we've made in Canadians have worked. We've had the fastest growth rate among G7 countries for the last 6 quarters. We have 600,000 more Canadians working today than a couple of years ago, lowest unemployment rate in 40 years. So when you think about dealing with those risks, and they're risks, you start with making sure that your economy is as resilient as it can be. And that's where we find ourselves. Clearly, the approach we've taken has been able to help our economy. We've done it in a fiscally responsible way. So now we can negotiate appropriately on NAFTA to make sure we don't accept just any deal, but we get a better deal, to make sure that we consider clearly what the ramifications are of changes in tax rates in the United States to make sure that we stay competitive.
Are you convinced there will be ramifications for Canada, negative ramifications?
What I can tell you for sure is that businesses are always going to be anxious for us to lower tax rates. What we do know, though, when we look just at the top line numbers, is that we remain the country with the lowest small business tax rates in the G7 countries. That's lower than the United States. And we know that the United States has changed their rates, so now they're about 1% lower than ours are in the top corporate tax bracket. We need to take a look at what the other issues are. There's a whole host of numbers. They've changed the way that you expense capital assets. They've changed the deductibility of interest. There's many of their measures that the regulations haven't been written yet. So I can't answer you with any clarity until we do our homework. You would expect that we would take a fiscally responsible approach. The same people that are saying lower your taxes are saying balance your budget. So we're being fiscally responsible. We're looking at it in the way that we should look at it to make sure we're competitive.
The rate of increased spending in this year's budget is lower than last year's budget. And is that because you think you may have to step in with more spending between now and the next budget?
The reason our approach this year is what it is because we can recognize that we can keep making long-term investments, which is consistent with what we've done, but we need to do it in a fiscally responsible way, and we've shown that. So by having the lowest debt as a function of our economy among the G7 countries, it puts us in a position to consider any eventualities. I know that we're talking about these 2 risks. There could be other risks. On the other hand, our economy could do better than we expect. So we're prepared for those eventualities.
You've got billions in increased spending over the next five years to come. How are you going to pay for it all?
You've seen our approach. We've made investments in Canadians. We've had an approach where we had confidence that they would invest back in the economy, and has grown the economy at a faster pace than anyone expected. It's created more jobs than anyone expected. We're in a very positive position. The investments we're making, and I would call them investments, not spending, because when you invest in science over the long term, you create the foundation for a strong and innovative economy. When you invest in infrastructure over the long term, you enable people to get back and forth from work more quickly. You help families. That's what we're trying to focus on, which is also going to increase the capacity of our economy to be successful.
You've announced in the budget an advisory panel on a national pharmacare plan. When do you think we'll see it?
Well, you'll see the advisory council.
When will I see the plan? When will the country see a national pharmacare plan?
Maybe what we can just acknowledge is we appointed a leader for this advisory council. He left his old job yesterday. So we have not yet framed out exactly the timelines. What we have said to Canadians is it's not okay that not all Canadians get access to pharmaceuticals without potentially having to forego food or lodging. That's our current situation. So you and your employment, me and my employment, many other Canadians have access to pharmaceuticals because they have an employee benefit plan. Other Canadians who are over the age of 65 have pharmacare through the government program. There's a gap there. We need to understand the gap, consider our current system, and get it right so we can balance an approach going forward that's giving the access to pharmaceuticals people need with our sense of always being fiscally responsible. We need more time, but we're going to get to this, and we're starting today.
There are those who say, we heard from Andrew Scheer earlier, the leader of the official opposition, as you know, saying, it's pretty clear from his comments that he believes this is the purview of provincial governments. What do you think the role of a federal government is in a national pharmacare plan?
I think that what you're seeing from the opposition is an unwillingness to acknowledge that there are Canadians out there who don't have access to pharmaceuticals. If we don't have federal leadership in this space, how do we expect that to change? What we're saying is that the national approach to healthcare that was introduced was a federal approach to healthcare that, yes, was delivered provincially. So we're saying we need to consider how we get at this very important issue in our healthcare system. You know, the fact that the Conservatives are sitting on their hands and trying to point fingers doesn't really surprise me. We want to make sure that we are doing the right things for Canadians. This is something that we know we need to think about and get right. We're starting on it now.
So have you put money into this proposal?
We have, as I've told you, a fiscally responsible plan that enables us to consider what we should be doing in the future. We've seen that the kind of approach we've taken, investing in Canadians, has grown the economy. Providing the sort of security that people see around something like this can also have positive economic benefits. Because if people are unable to get access to pharmaceuticals, they may not be able to get back to work as rapidly as they must. So we are looking at this in that context, investing in Canadians, and of course, when we get farther down the road, we will make sure that we do it in a fiscally responsible way.
In the context of international competitiveness, do you think a national pharmacare plan actually helps Canada on the competitive side if we have to deal with fallout from corporate tax cuts in the U.S.? Is that something you think employers in this country or people looking to invest in Canada, to set up companies in Canada, can look at a national pharmacare plan as a net benefit that might offset some of the advantages they see in other countries, such as the U.S.?
I don't want to get ahead of where we're at. What happens for most companies that invest in Canada is they put in place a benefits plan, and their employees do get pharmacare. I think the issue is what happens to those people who don't have a benefit plan. They work on their own. They're between jobs. So we have those challenges. The approach to this is to create an approach that allows people to have access even during those breaks in employment. As we know, the employment market is always changing quickly. It's changing more rapidly in the future than it has in the past. We need to think forward-looking how we make sure that access to pharmaceuticals stays there. We don't have the answer yet, Peter, but we know that we're going to get to that answer in a reasonable amount of time so that we can come forward and make sure that Canadians have access to a strong healthcare system across the board.
Let me finish on this issue. You don't expect this in place before the next election, do you? 20 months from now, there might be a national pharmacare plan. That's a little ambitious, maybe?
What you're going to see me doing over the course of the next, whether it's 20 months or, years to come, what we want to do is continue our focus on investing in the success of Canadians, ensuring that middle-class Canadians see the benefits for themselves and their families. This is part of that overall plan. What we've shown is that you can invest in Canadians, have confidence in Canadians, and as a result, the economy grows. As a result, we have more people employed. That's leading us to a better and more fiscally responsible approach. People have to look at outcomes and say, the approach we've taken, it's working. So let's keep going with it.
Pay equity for federally regulated workers. When will we see that?
Well, this is a leadership issue. We've said that we need to take the lead. We've announced that we're putting legislation in place this year. And what we're going to do is to ensure that we can be confident that women in the public sector, as well as in the federally regulated sector, get equal pay for equal work. It is work to do that, but we're getting on it today.
This has been talked about by governments for a long time and talked about pressed by and pushed by organizations who want to see it happen. So what people are talking about today is, okay, when? It's another step forward, but when do you think you can deliver on that promise? How long do you think that process takes?
We've said that we're putting legislation in place this year, so I think you know the way it works. We announced the budget. We have 2 budget implementation acts. They come out early and then later. So it will be in one of those two budget implementation acts, if not on its own, but this year. And that will identify exactly how we're going to move forward in a way that ensures we make real progress. There's a lot of details in our budget about exactly how we're going to do that, so we're far along in this.
Okay, and how do you expect the private sector, companies that aren't federally regulated, how do you expect them to react to that kind of pay equity legislation?
It's important to remember that in Ontario, the Ontario companies, or Quebec, the Quebec companies, which of course is more than the majority of companies in the country, already have proactive pay equity legislation. What we're talking about is the federal government, federally regulated sector, getting that right. I expect those companies, many of whom do a really good job on this already, to consider how they can ensure that we close that gap. You know, we're 15th out of 29 countries in the OECD on the hourly pay of men versus women. We can certainly do better than that, and that'll create more opportunities for women to be successful.
When will we hear about a plan to return to balanced budgets?
I think, you know, you may be thinking about the last election campaign. There was two parties that said, let's focus on austerity and cuts, and there's one party who said, let's invest in Canadians. And what happened? We invested in Canadians, we grew the economy, we created more jobs, we're doing it in a fiscally responsible way. When I step outside this country and people look at Canada, they say, wow, lowest debt as a function of the economy among G7 countries. Half the average. Plus they're able to lower the debt as a function of the economy each and every year. So taking a fiscally responsible approach to the medium and long term, that's the way to go on this issue. And it's one that recognizes that what we're trying to do is make sure we think about people first. Let's make sure that people actually have jobs so they can create opportunities for themselves and their families. That's what we've done, and it's working for the whole economy.
All right, Finance Minister Bill Morneau, good to talk to you again. Thanks for stopping by.
Thanks very much.